Hello and welcome to the Magical Learning Podcast. As you can see in the title, we have a guest today. Very excited. Our guest is Roxanne Calder, and we're going to be talking about her new book, Earning Power. Roxanne, we always like to start our podcast by asking people how their week's been. So let's start with how's your week been so far?
I'm a small business owner, so my week has been full on. I've probably already clocked most weeks full hours in by Tuesday, but it's Thursday, so Friday's just around the corner. It's been good. Can't complain. It's my choice.
I know, and how good is it running your own business?
Yeah, it is good,
We get
mostly.
Let's start, and we'll start really by getting you to introduce yourself to the audience. And so tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey so far.
So I own a recruitment business called S10. I fell into recruitment. It's been pretty much my history, my employment resume for since I graduated from university. I went to university with no plans of what career I wanted. I studied Japanese, went to Japan, became fluent in Japanese, came back after 3 years thinking that would be what I would do. Decided that wasn't going to be for me. Went for a job interview at a bank, and the recruiter who interviewed me said, "Oh, you probably should look at recruitment." So I fell into recruitment, loved it from the beginning. Knew I always wanted to have my own business one day, and started my recruitment company S10 in 2010. I've also studied, learning is really important to me. I've always done that. So I did a second degree, I did a master's in business. I can't remember when I did that, but I did do it. And I did that to make sure that I was always, ahead in terms of if I wanted to pivot or change careers. And I've stayed in the career, but it's helped me to do my job even more so. And I've written 2 books. My second one is the one that you just mentioned, Earning Power. I write regularly, thank you. I write regularly for different publications. Usually they're published weekly, and I've contributed to Harvard Business Review in a couple of their books. And I'm a workplace expert, and I have another business called, which is why I probably do these hours. I have another business, coaching and mentoring business as well.
Love that. I love that growth mindset. I was just talking about growth mindset in a webinar. So you totally
Yeah.
demonstrating that, Roxanne. That's awesome. Tell us a little bit about your new book, Earning Power, and why you wrote it.
Yeah, so I have by default, just happened by choice, but sort of fell into it. But I've always worked with women. I love working with women. Not that I dislike working with men, but I just particularly like working with women. And I've always, probably placed thousands of women in jobs over the years. And I've had noted for quite some time that women were less prone to advocate for themselves in the workplace. And for someone who has their own business, and it was not saying that I haven't also suffered from that in the workplace. I have. But for me, I was like, no, you're fantastic, Danette. Why are you not going for that opportunity? And I'd be, the person behind the scenes encouraging. And then they would come back to me and they would say, oh, Rox, I don't think I can do it. Or, no, I've spoken about it with my husband. We don't think it's right now for whatever reasons, family, whatever the reasons are at that time. Um, and I started to clock it, and I was thinking, I'm pretty sure that decision has cost that 35-year-old probably $1 million by the time that they, finish with their career. And then the next person would come along and we'd see it again. I'm talking about this is a daily event. The next time it would come along when someone would not take up a learning opportunity, it doesn't have to be career based. And the same thing. And so I started to sort of add this up, just, it's really quick. Math is a bit of a strong point of mine. So I'd just be really quickly adding it up, thinking that $1,000 knockback compounded is going to cost you this over your lifetime. And then, of course, when the gender pay cap came out in force last year, I mean, it's always been evident, but when it came out in force last year and it said the same thing, that the discrepancy in earnings is $1 million, I remember thinking, but I've known about this forever. Why is everyone shouting about it now? And that's what prompted me to write Earning Power. So Earning Power is written for women. Obviously, it's for men as well, but really I've guided it for women to encourage and empower women to earn more money.
And I love that you wrote it for that reason. And that leads me to my next question, which is tell us more about that gender pay gap. And particularly, you talked about that $1 million gap, the impact it has on females. It can be a small decision to start with, but how it compounds.
Yeah, so I think that when we talk about this is, it's a complex issue and people shy away from it. So on the one hand, we have the research. So you've got the WGEA, the Workplace Gender Equality Agency website, and according to their results, the March figures that came through, the discrepancy is 70. It had reduced 70, let's call it 78%, because it's pretty close to that. It's something like, point something out of it. So according to them, it sits at that level. But according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, it sits just under 12%. So the difference in that is the methodology of how they measure that. The ABS does not take into account casual workers, part-time workers. So it removes all of that. And in my mind, I'm like, well, if you remove that, you're not making it legitimate. So either way, doesn't matter if it's the 22% or does it matter if it's sitting at 12%. The facts remain that there's a difference in the earnings. So first of all, we've got that. And then if you look at the reports about that, all of the reports will sit and discuss it about being a systemic structural issues. And what they mean by that is active bias and discrimination in the workforce. So that's your boss saying, Danette, I'm not going to give you that job because you've just come back from mat leave and I think it's going to be too much for you. Or it could be due to carers' responsibilities. So, females taking on more caring responsibilities so they can't take on extra work. So most of it sits around that sort of area. But then if we look at it from an employment lens, which is where I see it from, I then see it from an agency perspective of women not taking up those sorts of roles or those sorts of opportunities. And that's where we see the gender pay discrepancy from a multitude of different areas. So, and at the beginning I said, oh, this is complex. The reason it's complex is because people want to sort of say oh, I think it's too hard to tackle, or I don't know if it really exists because didn't we fix that? Isn't equal pay a thing already? Well, this isn't about equal pay. This is about equality for of female worth and everything. So I've digressed a little bit with that just because I can go off on tangents when I do these things.
We do that, Roxanne.
So then if we take it from the perspective of the way I see it, if we wait for the structural changes to come through, if we wait for the systemic changes to come through, even if they do, it's hundreds of years away. So for people like you and I, we're never going to see those changes. So why would we wait? And not only that, our children won't see it either. So again, the book is written from a perspective of let's acknowledge that they are there or they may be there, but who cares about that? Let's just do something about it for ourselves. And when I talk about that, it's about the fact that we carry some of those bias into the workplace with us, and that's how we make those decisions that affect us. And you're right, it's about the small decisions.
Yep. And there was some stories I read in your book and I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. And so what I would say to our listeners and our viewers, I'm going to hold this book up again, really important to read because small decision can have long-term huge financial impacts.
Yeah. One of my favorite, if it's okay for me to mention, one of the favorite ones that I bring up is, I think it's in chapter 5, when I talk about how, if you're a woman who hasn't received a pay increase for 10 years, and some people will be like, that's not possible. But I can promise you, if you're sitting in if you went out for lunch with your girlfriends and there were 5 of you, one of you on that table hasn't had a pay increase for close to that period of time. We don't talk about it. So for that person who hasn't received a pay increase, and I'm talking about just even just wage growth, they stay on the same level, that person's missed out if you start on the basic level of what the average wage is according to Australian Bureau of Statistics of 98,000, that person has missed out on $140,000 over a 10-year period by not getting minimum wage growth of 2.4. And the other thing that we talk about with this $1 million discrepancy is the compound effect of those missed opportunities. And I think that's what people think about. They're like, oh, but 2% of 98,000 is what, 2,000, just over 2.4 is like 2,400, call it. That's okay. It's not worth me arguing with my boss about it. I feel really uncomfortable, so I'm not going to do that. That loss of that extra 2.5 grand that year, and again the following year, and again the following year, because you get the 2.4% increase on all of the increases, comes into, I think it was 139,000 over 10 years. And that's like a small difference when we talk about those small, deliberate, braver decisions that you make to go and speak to your boss and say, do you know what, can I talk to you about this?
And I love that. And definitely it's worth reading the book for people just to go, I hadn't thought of that before. So thank you for sharing that too. So I love you've got $1 million formula, and we want to talk about what it is, but also how does it help?
But the thing to know about this formula, and again, when we talk about the gap, is that people shy away from it. If I said to you, over your lifetime, or if you've got a daughter, your daughter is potentially going to miss out on $1 million over her lifetime. Both of you are probably going to be. That's not the case because I brought my daughter up differently to that. No, I'm a stronger female than that. I have not allowed that to happen in my life. But I can promise you pretty much 99.9% of every single female has been affected by this, because it's not just about the structural systemic, it's about the biases that we carry with us when we go to work. So this employment formula is like a lens. It's basically showing you what happens when you make that one small decision consistently over time can build to be $1 million, not just ahead for you financially now, but also the addition of that is the extra superannuation, which comes to something like $136,000 in superannuation with the difference is. And all the stats show that women are way behind men when it comes to retirement. And there's more women in poverty over the age of 50 as well. And all of that sort of accumulates and compounds. The formula, I think, is, if you think about this like a drop of water persistently over time, is able to carve out stone. So if your little decisions, your small decisions to back yourself, be braver, that's the same impact over your lifetime, $1 million. And, I talk again about this in the book when I sort of phrase it differently. Don't be afraid of that $1 million. It's not some miracle thing, or it's not you have to be lucky or have Tats Lotto. Try and break it down by saying things like, what do you think the difference could have been to your mother or grandmother's lives for $1 million? And then what would be the difference to your life now if that had been the case?
Yeah, I love that. And the other side is women live longer, so they need more money
That's
often.
right. That's right. And we use more moisturizer. I mean,
Love that, Rox.
more money for those things.
Hilarious. That's a very good point there. Let's go to some practical tips that can help women to achieve their dreams by thinking more about their earning power and just the things that they negotiate or don't negotiate as women.
I mean, I think about this, it's in my head all the time, to do with women and everything. And one of the things that I was thinking about, I think it was over the weekend, or I don't know what prompted it, but it made me think that sometimes we try and live other people's dreams. So I think it's important to know what your dream is, because if we're living other people's dreams, it's any wonder they don't come to fruition, because they're not. It's not for you. So in the book, again, to have the difference in $1 million, you don't have to have a career. So I'm not saying that you must have a career and you've got to be the CEO of the world. What I'm saying is just got to make different decisions. So I think the first thing is define what your dream is. If your dream is to work part-time, have your family, do all of those things, and that's perfect. You need to do that. But when you work part-time, make sure that you are earning your worth and that you are making the right decisions to maximize every potential that you've got there. Equally, I might be caned for saying this, but if you are in a relationship and your role is to look after the children, then what is your partner doing to help you contribute to your retirement and your superannuation? I think that women should protect themselves a lot more in this sort of area. So the first thing is understand what your dream is and define it and live that. The next thing is to back yourself. Like, we need to back ourselves more. Men are so great at backing themselves. Even when they don't believe in themselves, they'll still back themselves, and good on them for that. But women, we are more likely to unback ourselves. We talk ourselves out of a deal or a negotiation before we've even entered the room. And it's because we carry all of those, conditioning and bias from being a little girl. We just that, and again in the book I give examples of that happening where, day-to-day stories that we just sort of literally like carry that one on our shoulder, then we put another one on, then we load the backpack, and then we go to work and we just like got this weight that's sort of like this, and then how do we make empowering decisions when we're being pulled back like this by other people's thoughts, other people's ideas, instead of just, feeling confident and backing ourselves. So we need to back ourselves more. And even if you are worried about it, you're 70% there, still back yourself, fake it until you can make it. Understand that a career or a job is not a straight line. Often, and especially now, it is about making pivotal moves and making strategic moves and considered decisions. Again, chapter 5, I'll say that people deliberate more on what they're going to have for lunch than what they do on a decision at work. My boss has been offered me this role. No, I can't do it. I'm too scared. The reality is that people won't be thinking too scared. They'll come up with other reasons for it. But deep down, usually it's a fear-based decision that people won't take something on. And probably the last one is, what you and I seem to have in common about, learning. We need to upskill all the time.
Great answer there. And some really just practical things that people can do. We love to ask our authors about their writing process. So every single author seems to write differently. So, Roxanne, would you share how you go about writing, particularly given you've written 2 books?
So I was about to say to you, I still don't consider myself like an author or a writer.
And you are.
Well, see, again, I'm like, well,
On our podcast, Roxanne, you are totally an author. I encourage you to own it.
Thank you. So I loved English at school. I actually was going to do journalism as a cadetship, chose to do something differently. But when I say I loved English, I wasn't top of the class by any stretch, and still my grammar today needs work. But I loved losing myself in, and I think my parents gave me the best gift of reading. We were the kids that, and I was the doona with the torch when mum was like, lights off.
You and me both.
Yeah. And then, when you finished a book, I would be depressed. I'd be like, oh, it's over. And I'd pick the books that had the series, so I can continue. And then I'd be waiting for the next one to come out. And I'd go to the library with my dad when I was sick. I can still smell it. And like the Enid Blyton books and all those things. I've got goosebumps now when I talk about it because I loved it so much. Famous Five, Secret Seven, anything I could get my hands on. No, that's a nerd moment, so I won't share that. But
You're a nerd. I'm exactly like you, so go for it.
So my dad bought us children's encyclopedias. So we had the World Book encyclopedias, in the day when someone would come and sell them at your door. So we had the World Book encyclopedias, but then we also had children's versions of encyclopedias, which was about animals. And I would read the encyclopedias, the children's encyclopedias, from start to finish. And, like I loved it all. So going back to writing, with the first book, because I had not written or done anything for a period of time, I remember feeling like I just couldn't focus. Like I could not sit down for any period of time and actually write anything because I was so used to reacting and being quick and my emails being 3 lines or whatever it might be. And so I found it really hard and I procrastinated a lot. My house was never cleaner and I decided that I needed to learn how to type. Because how could I possibly write if I couldn't type quickly? I mean, I still can't type quickly. Like, it's shocking. So I did everything I possibly could to put it off until I got into it. And then when I would get into it, I would lose myself. So when I wrote the second book, Earning Power, and I think it's important that people know this because, well, certainly from my perspective, because I don't want people to think that it's just something like it's really, and for some people it might be easy, but for me it was not easy. It was really long days, like 15-hour days. I think I worked for 6 months, 7 days a week to finish the manuscript. You have to do a lot of research. You have to be able to learn, and I still am learning how to do this. You have to learn how to write concisely so people get the message. All of that sort of comes with it. Plus, you can't be writing. I remember when I submitted something, the editor came back and said, Rox, this is good, except you're making it about you. I'm like, oh, I'm mortified. So, you learn really quickly and you have to be great at taking feedback on because if you don't take feedback on, then how are you going to make it the best possible piece it can be? So I loved it, but it was a lot of work, a lot of lack of sleep, and everything that went in it. And you just have to be committed to finishing it. And I had a lot of support around me. So, my partner, you need that. You can't do it on your own. I am also a very early riser. So,
You and me both. 4
yeah, 4 a.m. That's me. Yeah. So that's my best time. Like I'm selfish because nobody else is up. I'm like, this is great. No emails, no phone calls, no husband. And so selfishly, I would get up as early as I can. Sometimes it's smidgen earlier, sometimes, but not often. And for whatever reason, my brain would be the freest then, and that would be when the best work is that I could get done. The later in the afternoon, I'm not so great. Early morning person. And plus, I think that if you get to see the trees or you do some form of walking or anything like that, hear the birds, I don't know, for me, that just it gives me inspiration. And it's the same when I write articles. First of all, work out what tactic I'm going to take look what, take I'm going to take on the article because I like to have a different twist to it, even if it's subtle. Then I make sure I've got good research and then I just sink myself into it.
Love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I love that we're a 4 a.m. people. I'm writing some courses and all this week, 4 a.m. up I go.
Yeah, it's people think you're weird, and especially when people talk about work-life balance, I'm always like, well, what works for you, that's great, but that doesn't work for me. And 4 a.m. is perfect for me.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
Yeah.
Now we're coming to the end of the interview and really like to see, Roxanne, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners and our viewers? Obviously around your book, Earning Power, which I'll hold up. But also where people can reach out if they've got questions, etc.
Sure. So the two different businesses, one is S10, EST10 Recruitment. So you can go to our website. You can follow us on Instagram. The other coaching and mentoring business is called Roxanne Calder as well. So you can find me there. Also, that's the handle on Instagram as well. And the books are available on Amazon.
Awesome. So glad you wrote this book, Roxanne. And thank you so much for joining us on the Magical Learning Podcast. And to all of our listeners and viewers, have a magical week.